Now, the exact wording of the apology when the Prime Minister delivered it was, in the Great Hall at least, the creation of detailed work and consultation with groups affected. The Liberal member for Swan in Western Australia, Steve Irons, was actually on the committee that helped draft the wording of that formal apology, so not the Prime Minister's speech in the House of Representatives, but the text that was read out in the Great Hall. And before his duties in the chamber and to other visitors, we did manage to talk to Steve Irons here in our studio before the apology. Well, Steve Irons, you were instrumental back in 2009 in the delivery of another apology that was to child migrants and those who were forcibly adopted. Do you see parallels in the atmosphere around this place today?
Yeah, the anticipation and I guess the celebration is there, and as I've seen it before, and on three other occasions, we've apologised in the Parliament for events of Australia's history, and I can see that now. I've been dealing with the groups in the run up to this, and it's for them something exciting.
They're big moments, all of them, the three that you've identified in the life of your time here in Parliament. As you look back on those that have been delivered before, what's been their positive effect over the longer term? What do they achieve?
I think the apologies have achieved a continuation of that, the fact that we believe the stories that were told by victims and survivors of time in institutions, and I think that's given them some hope to get it to a point of a national redress scheme, which has now commenced. And today's event is part of the recommendations of the Royal Commission, and that's to, again, apologise to those who are the subject of the Royal Commission.
Now, you got in on the ground floor with the establishment, or calling for the establishment of that Royal Commission. How did you arrive at that position, really, before many others in this building?
Well, I think because of my own personal experience and my family's experience, but my engagement with the people who had been in institutions, they'd identified early that I was one of the few politicians in Parliament who'd spent time in an institution. So during that process, they encouraged me that that's what they were looking for. And so I called for it along with some of the other members of Parliament, and I think about 3 weeks after I actually called for it was when Julia Gillard made the announcement.
Right. And you've been involved, I think, in the formulation of the wording of the apology to be delivered by the Prime Minister. How delicate? Take us inside, I suppose, the negotiations around that, if not the wording. What considerations had to be brought to the table as you looked at the apology?
Well, there was a reference group that was formed by the former Prime Minister, Malcolm Turnbull, and that reference group travelled around Australia and spoke to stakeholders and spoke to people who had been in institutions, and also those who are advocates for those who'd been in institutions. And during that process, we took on board all their suggestions of what they wanted to hear and what they didn't want to hear. Now, unfortunately, it's only a 20-minute speech, so to cram that all into that period of time would be a very difficult object to achieve.
So there's had to be negotiations.
Yeah. But I think one of the main points that we heard was they don't only want to hear an apology, they want to hear what action the government's taking. And
the Prime Minister is at liberty, I suppose, to put his own imprimatur on this. It's not all, as a speech, calculated and designed by the reference committee, is it?
No, I'm sure he'll have his own imprimatur on it, and Scott's very sensitive to the needs and is aware of the needs of the people who are going to be here today, and he understands them. He's met with them. I've had extensive conversations with him over the years about certain, or my journey travelling with these people, so he is acutely aware of what needs to be delivered. But the nature of the situation is that you're not always going to get someone who's happy. There might always be someone who's disappointed at their suggestion might not have got into his speech.
In fact, it's double-edged, isn't it, for some survivors and victims who are coming today. Yes, their stories have been able to be aired and recognised nationally, and yet I heard on the radio this morning at least one victim saying that's had its downsides too. I didn't really feel like I needed to have to tell the government of Australia or the people. Do you think in that sense it's a wrenching experience for people today?
Well, anyone who's lived the experience, and it's a lifetime experience. It never goes away. It never heals. So that's one of the important things that they suggested we don't talk about healing in the speeches, because it doesn't heal. And speaking to people closely, there will be expectations, there'll be emotions, there'll be depression, and that's why we've got counsellors who will be in the Great Hall today for people who become emotional and need counselling.
And that's to be anticipated, is it?
It is to be anticipated. My strong memory of the apology after the Forgotten Australians was actually leaving the hall to do a radio interview with the ABC, and as I came back in, one of the people from my electorate came out and was absolutely bawling her eyes out, and in that process she often relates to me that she remembers the most emotional time was when I went up to her and gave her a huge hug after the apology, and she has that as a constant reminder, and I expect to see that today as well.
Yeah, I'm sure there will be many shoulders to be cried on today, but that is to be expected. Steve Irons, I know you've been involved in this all the way through. I hope this is a memorable and in some ways, I suppose, fulfilling experience for everyone involved, including yourself. Yeah,
that's what we're hoping for, and I hope the people who can celebrate today really enjoy the day, and those who it brings back memories it's not too sad a day for them.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So Liberal MP Steve Irons, that was, of course, before the apology.